Can Washington pull in an elite receiver class?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's the site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in the episode. Lars, we've got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to finish off with, will luck be on Washington's side in 2025? We're recording this on St. Patrick's Day. You've got your Sonics jersey on. I've got my green Locked On shirt on for all the audio-only listeners out there who we love very much and appreciate. Please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. By the way, subscribe on YouTube or else you get your podcast. It'll be pretty self-explanatory, The luck of the Irish might not have been on Washington's side as much in 2024. We'll talk about what that could look like this upcoming season and if things might balance out with the way the ball bounces and different things like that. But we want to spend a whole lot of time on the wide receivers over the course of this episode. A little later on, we're going to get to our outlook for the position in 2025. We're really excited about some of the young guys. Omari Evans, transfer that came in alongside Denzel Boston. But Lars, this is a really interesting 2026 class.
It really is. I mean, no pun intended on the really. You look up and down the list. I think they have over 3 dozen offers to wide receivers in the 2026 class. Now, again, obviously, not every kid you offer, you're highly recruiting. So of that 3 dozen, call it roughly a dozen and a half. I'd probably say, I put the number at 15, 16, that they're legitimately recruiting / in the ballpark for. And of that, I'd probably dwindle it down to about 8 or 9 guys where I think that they're seriously considering. One of them that I wanted to start off with, because I think there's a unique Oklahoma theme to this whole operation where you flip Marcus Harris, not officially flip because we had the discussion of, flip if he made a decommitment. But, a kid that was committed to Oklahoma for a long time ends up at Washington. Oklahoma has another 4-star wide receiver committed from a high school in California, St. John Bosco, I believe, Daniel Odom. We'll talk about him later on. But the one that really strikes me is Mason James because he's from Oklahoma, does have an official visit set to Oklahoma. But when I talked to him about a week or so ago now, before his official visit to Washington had been public that it was out there for the correct date in June or in May, whatever it was.
Yeah, June 6th.
That was the guy to me where it just sounded like, no, I already know I'm getting back up to Washington. I already know, what it really sounded like was almost in a way like what Brady Smigel had done this past junior day, where he wants to get, when he comes up for his official, to meet with players on the team, really spend time around the players, get to know what it's like to be a day in life and student athlete at Washington. That's what Brady did this past junior day, and I think that's what a lot of guys are going to experience, including Mason James, on their official visit come May and June.
Yeah, absolutely. Where let's talk about Mason James, 4-star wide receiver from Norman, Oklahoma, the number 2 player in the state down there, ranked in the top 200 in this class. And so I like what you're talking about there because he's got 4 official visits set. He's going to go to Arizona State, Missouri, Washington, and Oklahoma. So that's an interesting little group there. And I think Washington's sitting in a really nice spot for him. It's very clear that he's high on Washington, where Kevin Cummings went to visit him a couple times during the contact period where he flew out to Oklahoma to go visit him at school and everything like that. And then Mason reciprocated that interest by coming up to Washington for the junior day, which was nice because the one that, you want to talk about some of the guys that might be able to flip a little bit later on, where it's just seeing what kind of class you can build around Brady Smigel. And, you've talked about what Kasani Giles said about the California wave that's coming at some point down the line. But stepping out of the recruiting footprint is still such an important part of that. And Mason James I wrote about him a little bit over on Huskies Wire, is kind of that, that statement where he's not at the level in terms of as a recruit of what Donovan Olubade was or what Andrew Marsh was, but he's not necessarily that far off either in terms of stature, where a 4-star player from Oklahoma that, could potentially end up at Washington, that's just not something that happens very often. And, it's one of those things that could potentially open a door for Washington later on where it's, oh, hey, yeah, he goes up there and he does really well. Maybe that's something I'm going to give a closer look to over the course of my recruitment. But let's stick in California here for a second. I want to go to my hometown of Sherman Oaks, California, where 3-star wide receiver Luc Weaver appears to be really close to setting up an official visit. He's somebody who I think has flown under the radar over the course of just the entire recruiting cycle, and is somebody who has very quietly been pretty high on Washington's list. But, with guys like Vance Spafford and Madden Williams and Daniel Odom on campus, he's not necessarily going to get the same amount of attention. But I think he's a really solid player that if he does end up setting up an official visit, I really like where Washington stands with him as well. And is somebody to keep an eye on.
Wait, interestingly enough, as you say that, I'll give you an exact reason as to why he's not very far off. Daniel Odom is the number 32 player in the state of California on 247.
Yeah.
Luc Weaver is 36. So Luc Weaver is a 3-star, Daniel is a 4. They're basically right there. And I would assume at some point Weaver might get a 4-star just because he's clearly right on the border of 3 and 4-star status. Even if it's a high 3, you still want to take him because you look at his size, 6'3". We were talking about Mason James. Yes, he can play outside, but Luc Weaver is one of those guys where truly that's your outside threat. Mason James and some other small, the Vance
Spafford, who's committed as well. Yeah.
All those guys kind of fit more into that slot receiver mode, but that's not to say that they can't play outside. You just rarely do you see a guy at 5'11", 5'10" playing on the outside on a consistent basis. That's why you want to go get those tall trees, California trees, no pun intended here, to, really solidify the room and give you a multitude of options like we'll talk about in the second segment.
Yeah, so with that being said, you want to talk about some of the flips. I want to talk about Vance Spafford for a minute, where this is a really intriguing case where he's committed to Georgia, seems pretty firm on that, but really is looking around. Where USC, Oregon, Washington, where he's visiting these campuses, and he really is saying, I don't necessarily know if it's something where he's saying as much as, hey, I'm having doubts about my commitment to Georgia. It's, I want to consider these options closer to home because maybe I didn't, think, I don't want to say he didn't think it through, but I didn't think that it would be quite as far of a trip as it is where, it's a 2-hour flight here to Washington, staying in the same city really with USC. So I'm curious to see what this one looks like because this is one of those guys where I'm sure with, Daniel Odom, Madden Williams as well, that you want to talk about where if and when, in our opinions with everything that's going on, when Brady Smigel ends up with Washington, again, with the crystal balls and everything like that, I don't want to jump the gun and say, hey, this is where he's going because that's not up to us. But assuming that is the move for him, he is that kind of guy that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks and months that can define this class and can make someone like Vance Spafford or anybody else that was considering Washington that might have committed somewhere else say, hey, Brady's going to end up in Washington. Maybe that's somebody I want to go play with at the next level.
And interestingly enough, Vance Spafford came up the same weekend that Dash Beardley did last year for that Under Armour thing, although Washington, I don't believe it offered at that point. I could be wrong on that, but I don't remember them being tied to him at any point at that point in time. And so I think in part it was kind of like Jedd still playing catch up from that move last year where he made a bunch of offers last year, but like last fall for the 26th class, but some of those were Josh Amora, some of those were guys that have since left the program. And so now you're still trying to kind of recycle and say, hey, we still want to maintain that relationship. One thing that is worth noting with Jedd and these wide receivers, just in totality, which we'll carry over to the next segment as well, Jedd, Kevin Cummings, and Caleb Wilson, the assistant wide receivers coach, are all in lockstep when it comes to these receivers. They are hands-on. Jedd is very much like speaking specifically of Mason James only because I know that having talked to him, but I would imagine it goes for a lot of other guys in this class. Jedd is playing a hands-on role. Kevin Cummings obviously playing a hands-on role, and Caleb Wilson as well. So you're talking about 3 guys with either NFL experience or a significant amount of college experience dedicated to the receiver position. And that's why you're wondering, wow, how is Washington playing for over 3 dozen receivers, or let's just call it 2 dozen, and most of which are 4-stars? Well, you got the resources here, and I think the scheme will certainly pay dividends, especially this year.
No, absolutely. I really like where you're going with that. With that being said, let's get to 2025 because this could be a really nice year at the position. Right after a message from our friends over at Nissan, the Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On College Basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets, these guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week is the Florida Gators. The Gators, led by Walter Clayton, 17 points a game, just dominated the SEC tournament, winning each game by at least 9 points. Not only did Florida grab the 4th number 1 seed, but they are the nation's most efficient on offense. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Florida Gators have done here. It's clear that our team of the week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. We've also got a message from our friends over at Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes. In many cases, no health exam is required. As a parent, you want to make sure your family is financially protected no matter what happens. Fabric gives you that peace of mind. You can get $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day, so protecting your loved ones doesn't have to break the bank. Fabric also offers free digital wills and access to investment accounts to help you plan for your children's future. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockdowncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockdowncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. So, Lars, when we look at 2025, Denzel Boston is going to be the 1A, the alpha in the room, where we saw what he looked like at the beginning of last season, and then as defenses started to adapt, and more so as the offensive line started to falter, we saw his production fall off a little bit. We had our bold prediction that he was going to lead the Big Ten in touchdowns, and hey, for the first half of the season, he did. And then things started to go downhill a little bit from there, not necessarily in terms of his play, but just in terms of the way the offense looked as the offensive line continued to go downhill. But having somebody who can stretch the field across from him in Omari Evans could really change just the outlook for this offense with Demond Williams at the helm.
Yeah, and it was something where we saw Giles Jackson ironically finish slightly high, right above Denzel in terms of total yards per game at the receiver position, not something either of us had expected because we thought Jeremiah Hunter would be that guy, and for whatever reason, that just didn't come to fruition until the Sun Bowl when Demond started. I don't know, again, that might be its own show for a different day. But Omari is that guy when you look at him coming from Penn State, where he didn't have a ton of production, but again, as Washington fans will have seen in the whiteout, wasn't exactly a high-throwing offense, wasn't exactly what Jedd Fisch is going to run at Washington. And I think that's why you go and get a guy who can stretch the field vertically, like you mentioned with the other you had on from Penn State, where he can be that downfield threat opposite of Denzel and open things up, or whoever is joining those two, whether it's a 2-receiver set, 3-receiver set, or God forbid a 4-receiver set, who knows? But it gives you a plethora of options. And I think at one point or another, no matter how the offensive line does, Demond's ability to scramble, someone is going to find their way open, whether it's Denzel, whether it's Omari, whether it's Kevin Green over the middle, Quentin Moore, Decker DeGraff, tight end. You're starting. This is a problem that you didn't have last season, where you would look at the names like, wait, we might think Giles, maybe Jeremiah, and probably Denzel. And then after that, it was kind of like, well, we'll see who emerges after that. Now you're talking about 5 before you even get to Rashid and some of the younger guys.
So I like where you're going with that. I really do think this could end up being a breakout year for Rashid Williams, where we saw the way he looked at spring practice and even fall camp last year. And it's one of those things where I kind of think about, in a sense, what it was like watching Denzel Boston in the fall of 2023 and the spring as well, and even fall 2022 to an extent, where it was like we knew Rome Odunze was the guy, but we also knew that watching Denzel was not necessarily as far off as it might have seemed. And obviously Rome took a huge step forward and was just spectacular throughout the 2023 season. And he was spectacular in 2022 as well. But I felt a similar way watching Rashid Williams, where we watched Jeremiah Hunter, we watched Giles Jackson. It was, hey, these guys are really good, but Rashid's not too far off. And this could be the year he takes a step forward. And adding a veteran guy like Omari Evans, who is a one-year transfer. So it's not something where, hey, long-term, he's somebody who is going to compete for this spot. It's somebody who has I think is going to have a very particular role in this offense, as our good buddy Zach Seiko of Locked On Nittany Lions told us when he came on a couple of weeks ago, where I don't think he's going to necessarily hamper what Rashid's production might look like. And it's something where with Kevin Green, we know that's somebody who can line up in the slot. Rashid can line up inside and outside. So there's a little bit more that you can do with him from a versatility standpoint. And I think one of the big questions as we get into spring ball, as we get into fall camp down the line, the question might be with who could start there. Because I think right now you and I agree that Kevin Green is the favorite to have that position locked down as of right now. But I think one of the things that might matter most is who's going to block better and who's going to just be able to show off that, hey, I'm a willing and able run blocker and I can seal the edge on some of these read options, on some of these other plays where somebody's going to want to get to the outside. And I like Rashid's potential on that side as well because of what his frame is. He's a big, strong kid, and he's only getting stronger with what the strength program has going on.
Yeah, in a way, it's like Denzel in 22 when he was the one that, well, not singularly strong, but the receiver that helped open the lane for Wayne Talapapa. But that was him as a freshman, and the reason why he was on the field was because he was one of the better blockers in that room, even more so than Jalen McMillan. And I don't know if Jalen Polk was hurt at the time, but you just look at that room and think, wow, like that was a statement in of itself. Rashid could have that similar role. And I think the other thing to consider is, given Omari's track record at Penn State, where he's not coming to Washington and say, hey, I want to be developed as an NFL receiver, but that doesn't necessarily mean I need to have 50, 60, 70, 80 catches or whatever the case may be. I think Omari is smart enough to know I can still go on and have an NFL career while helping bring along not Denzel, well, not Denzel a little bit more so, but like Rashid, Audric Harris, those type of guys where clearly he knows and this coaching staff knows they are the next wave of the present and future of the program at the receiver position. Denzel is obviously like the A1 of that group, but you're looking at it and thinking, well, we don't want to hamper those guys because not to say that they would go in the portal, but in this day and age, you want to make sure, hey, like the veterans are kind of more, playing that mentor role while still getting production, more production than Jeremiah Hunter got this past season. But I think in a way that the reps are going to all balance out, where Audric's still going to get his, Rashid's still going to get his. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a case of, well, we brought him in, so we kind of need to give him the reps, or you're the younger guy now, Omari's disgruntled or whatever. I don't think it's going to be that way and I think given what they went through with the receiver from Texas who is no longer with the program, I think getting Omari specifically with that character development in mind of, hey, look, like you see the room, you see what we want, but we also know you want to kind of get a fair shot at an NFL system. Let's marry the both worlds together. And I think that's probably what we're going to see, but we haven't necessarily seen it yet because we haven't been out to spring practice yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I like where you're going with that. So let's talk about those younger guys. I think Audric Harris is a really great name to bring up because our buddy Christian Capel over at On Mont Lake, shout out to him, does fantastic work. One of his favorite things to do during the pro day is he likes to go around to every single player that we in the media get a chance to talk to. And he always asks them for one under the radar breakout player on both sides of the ball. I always ask, offense and defense. Some guys will always take their side of the ball and say, oh, you know about this guy, but let me tell you about this one. The one that a lot of people mentioned, I know Jeremiah Hunter did, was Audric Harris, where he said, this is somebody who I really love the way he plays the game. He's really smooth, and he's just somebody who's continuing to grow, continuing to get better, where we know he burned his red shirt last year and didn't necessarily have the production that might fall in line with somebody who typically does that. But it's one of those things where if you look at what his high school film was and you look at what he could bring this offense, he's another guy who can get vertical and get down the field and stretch out the defense. And if he continues to refine himself as a route runner and is able to just continue to play fluidly, is the best way that I think to put that, he's somebody who could become a major threat. And behind him, he's going to have some guys to on his heels because I look at Raiden Vinesbury and Marcus Harris and Chris Lawson, Deji Jose, Desmond Roebuck as well, that entire class of freshmen. And I say there's a lot of potential here. And it's one of those things where I don't even want to make a prediction on who's going to play. I know you're big on Marcus Harris being the one, if anybody does in that room, burn their red shirt. Where I'm kind of at the point where, hey, if it's Deji Jose because they love his frame and they think he's somebody who can, as I said with Rashid earlier, block really well on the outside, I wouldn't argue that point. But if it's also, hey, we love how strong Desmond Roebuck is at the catch point and how versatile he is over the middle of the field and everything that he can do as a reliable target, I'm not going to argue that either with Raiden Vinesbury and his speed, same thing. But the more I say that, and I'm just kind of realizing this in the moment, is this. I already knew this was a really good class, but it's one of those things where I have a feeling we might see more of those freshmen on the field this year than you might think.
Well, it's something Kevin Cummings talked about last fall camp, where every year at least one freshman is going to play and play more than 4 or 5 games. And I think Obviously, last year with the limited number, it was only going to be one because you looked in the other two were Jason Robinson and Justice Williams. Justice Williams hurt. Jason Robinson, special teams player of the year, all those sorts of things, but was never really seemed like, especially late into fall camp, never seemed like a guy who was going to threaten Najee Harris snaps. Now you're looking, you got 5. Of the 5, you have Marcus Harris, Raiden Vinesbright, and Chris Lawson as the 3 early enrollees before the start of spring. So the guys who will be here in spring camp. Of those 3, I would say 2 will guarantee burn their red shirt, and the third might, depending on how the season goes. If the luck is on their side, maybe they will. Luck is not on your side, maybe you keep just 2 burn their red shirt, 3 don't, and then you kind of stack the class that way.
I appreciate the alley-oop there because, Lars, if luck is on Washington's side this season, they could end up at 10-2. We'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent around multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivered incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
So, Lars, will luck be on Washington's side in 2025? We saw a couple things go wrong between Grady Gross's mishaps at times, running on the field after a field goal block, a couple other things in that light. I don't want to get into calling a speed option on the short side of the field at the 1 yard line on 4th and goal. That's not luck. That's a different issue. But I think after a lot of things that went wrong last season, including, Zach Durfee's injury luck, a couple other injuries really in that same vein, luck could really fall back in the way of Washington's favor this season.
And it ironically starts with the schedule. Like, you look at the schedule this coming season, and luck is already on your side. Like, luck, fortune, whatever you want to call it. We're going to call it luck because it's St. Patrick's Day. But, you look at who's going to be on the schedule. Yes, you have to go to at Michigan. You have to go to Camp Randall. You have to get. I'm not saying it's a cakewalk in the schedule. Quint Kesnich isn't going to come on the television at any point this season and say, "Hey, look at Washington's, cupcake Big Ten schedule." It's obviously not.
He might just because he wants to. That's yeah.
Quint. Hi, Quint. How's it going? But with that being said, you look at it and think, okay, you have Ohio State at home. You have Oregon at home. You have a couple other games. Obviously, the non-conference pretty favorable. You do have to make the trip to Pullman, but it is in September, so you don't have to worry about that late snow game. I promise you, it will. Knock on wood here, but will not snow in mid to late September in Pullman. That would be a first even for me. So I look at it and say, already luck is on Washington's side because now you have an experienced Demond. Jimmy Doherty's coming back, so the offense really is the same. Yes, you're replacing your offensive coordinator and you are replacing your offensive line coach, but everything that Washington had, offensively, at least, everything is better. Defensively, I think it will be better, but, you still want to take a wait-and-see approach. Javon Parker coming back from injury and things like that. Zach Durfee, the one that you mentioned. Also, offensively, Quentin Moore. Hopefully, he doesn't get taken out by a guy coming off the sideline, 10 plays into 2025 like he did last year. So there was a lot that did not work in Washington's favor. Quentin Moore fully healthy, fully engaged, all that sort of thing. Those are the little details that kind of matter to make the season what it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. Where that's something I'm really intrigued by where, you talk about the schedule. That was one thing where I'm glad you mentioned that because obviously the Indiana resurgence was something that really nobody saw coming across the college football landscape. And with that, you had to go take 3 trips on the road to go play college football playoff teams. going to the whiteout, going to Oregon. And then, of course, you add the Indiana trip on top of that, which is really difficult. You don't have to take nearly as many trips where you're spanning multiple time zones, where you had Iowa, you had Indiana, Penn State, and then Rutgers on top of that, where you only have 2 of those this season, where that is helpful. And we're not saying that in a way of, oh, that sucks, you need to do away with those. No, we understand that's just what the conference is. That's how it's going to be. But if you don't have to make 4 of those, it's a little bit easier. So that part is certainly very helpful. And I think it's one of those things where, I look at just what demand could be, where we saw a little bit of a freshman mistake from last season where it was the Eastern Michigan game, right? Where he runs through somebody and then tries to spin off and he fumbles the ball because he's holding out here. Where those are little things that is so important to get Demond into different games last year and have him see different things. He throws that interception in the Sun Bowl as well. And, it sucks how that game turned out, being a 1-point loss, everything like that. But those 2 little moments, the fumble against Eastern Michigan and the interception in the Sun Bowl, which was a really nice play by the defender, by the way, both of those moments, all of a sudden you don't look at those this season, because I don't think you see moments like that happen this season where, sure, Demond might fumble, sure, players might fumble and throw interceptions, but he has already had time to learn from these experiences. And then now all of a sudden we're not saying, oh, that's bad luck, because Demond already knows just kind of the basics of the game. He's got his feet under him with all the snaps that he took this past season.
Absolutely. Well, okay, so 2 things on that note. One, as you mentioned, same thing with Demond. I don't think he's going to miss Decker to Graf. I kind of hinted at that on a show a couple of weeks ago, where they've been working at that. So I think all those little things, and then the same thing with the end of the Sun Bowl, where it's you're going for it. You're right there. You're not down by 21 at the end of the game trying to just chase points. Like, you're trying to win the game. Like, that's exactly what you want. And all those little near misses last season, same thing with Grady will come back this season. The other thing that, as you were saying, that reason why I was kind of starting to smile there, what are the odds Ryan Walters calls a cover 0 twice in a game?
On 3rd and 20? Yeah.
20th. So, my point is, I don't think you're going to have that. As good as Steve Belichick was, and all what the defense, it was a good defense last year. It wasn't great, wasn't horrible. There was a couple of horrible moments, but I don't think, especially knowing the Big Ten and knowing Ryan Walters, I don't think he's going to have those type of lapses in judgment, especially now. Like, you're not a head coach. You can go back to just being a DC, or maybe Ryan Walters, head coach, maybe he does have those slips in judgment. But in that, because again, when we're talking about going between 6-6, 6-7, and then 8-4, then potentially 10-2, these are all very narrow windows here. And if you don't have some of those lapses, and obviously John Mateer now at Oklahoma, so Zevi Eckhouse, good, similar scrambler, but not as good as John Mateer was. I think those are some of the things where if you're able to beat Wazoo, go 3-0. God forbid you beat Ohio State at Husky Stadium, and then you run it back to the big house and go back to that. Like, there's certain things where it's like, if you can start stacking these wins, where we thought last season that they would be potentially 4-1, 5-1 when you go into the month of October, and then you start facing the meat of your schedule. If you're able to go in that same mold, that's where the 10-2 comes into play. And yes, some of it has to do with luck, but also kind of, it's almost like last season you're paying for now this season. I have a hard time envisioning, as good as, again, full circle here, we talked about defense and offense, and talked special teams a little bit. I have a hard time believing Grady will be as bad as he was. And when I say as bad as he was, his misses, those 5 misses, were probably by a combined 10 yards in terms of each one's about a yard and a half that were missed. So it wasn't atrocious, but I just have a hard time seeing what Grady did in 23. And then like all of a sudden guys like now terrible and can't make big kicks in big moments. Like, it's going to come to roast at some point.
So no, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that's one thing where, obviously sometimes, you slip, whatever happens, or little bits and pieces like that. But it's why Jedd went so far to address that with bringing in 2 guys to run special teams. And I think that's a really important part of this when, you think about just the minutia of things that could have impacted a season, where obviously, we wanted to have some fun and talk just St. Patrick's Day stuff with luck and everything like that. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is the repetition and the help and the coaching, where we know Jedd brought in an outside consultant to help Grady when he was struggling early on last season. That's not the case this season, because you have 2 of those people in the building. Like they have really strong track records in terms of what they've been able to do on special teams throughout their careers. So having multiple multiple coaches like that to help out somebody like Grady Gross, to help out a Dusty Zimmer who could end up being a big factor in the punting game as well. Those are the minute changes that you look at from last season to this season. And as Jedd continues to talk about buy-in and building the program that he wants to, those are things that could really make a major impact down the line.
Yeah, you can't buy your own luck, but you can sure as heck do everything in your power to stack the deck so that if you do need a little bit of luck, well, it's not necessarily luck, it's more good fortune because of the resources that you've dumped in that you just mentioned. And I think that was why Jedd came to Washington. It's why last season was what it was and why he addressed it in year one. Like, you kind of have to – this is off season one. Like, that was the prologue in 24, 25 coming into the season. Now Jedd knew what he had to do to get right. He's done it, and now you just have to see if it pays off. And I think, if anything, all the cards are on the table to where Jedd's not going to go look back and say, yeah, I should have done that. I should have got a second special teams coach. I should have got something like this. No, you did everything. You did everything you possibly could. Now you just got to make the right calls on Saturday, which is part of the other problem, which luck doesn't necessarily help with, but luck will be on your side.
So let's end with that, with a real luck note, right? Where it's something when we talked to Jeremiah Hunter the other day, we put out a little conversation that we had with him over on our YouTube page. Go check that out with the shorts. It's on all forms of social media as well, by the way, at Locked On Huskies. Follow us on there as well. Is Jeremiah kind of talked about that play that Damon made in the Sun Bowl, where he stepped up, spun away from another sack, and threw it while getting just absolutely hammered. And Jeremiah Hunter called it the best quarterback play he's ever seen. And to an extent, you can look at a little bit of that and say, hey, yeah, the defender's coming at him from this angle. It's a little lucky, whatever. Having a good quarterback who is able to bail you out in some of those certain situations where maybe the play call isn't perfect and find a way to improvise, some people might look at that and say, oh, wow, it was lucky you have somebody like that who can bail you out. It's all part of the design. It's all part of the design. We're saying that's why you go out and you recruit a true dual threat quarterback in the Damon Williams mold who can go out and make so many different plays in that vein, the improviser vein, to use a college football 25 reference, because those are the little things that at the end of the day can win you games. And it might look like the luck of the Irish, but no, it all comes back to something else. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you everybody who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's 5-star reviews, it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.